Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome to session 2. Today, let's talk about instructions and modeling. In other words, how do we communicate the goals and procedures of an activity to our students? Keep in mind that this is my opinion and ideas about instructions, but you might have different ideas of how to give effective instructions to students. So I look forward to you sharing that in class. But I think that effective instructions solve 4 tasks. Number 1, students can understand them. Of course, if we give instructions and students do not understand what we say, then the instructions are not effective. So, for me, the most effective instructions are simple, affirmative, and imperative. Simple, they are not too long winded of sentences. Affirmative means that they focus on what students should do and not what they should not do. Psychologically, people just tend to respond better to instructions that are asking them what to do rather than asking them what not to do. The idea is psychological reactance, in which students might have a negative response to when a teacher says, "Okay, don't look at the other person's paper." Instead, you can say something like, "Only look at your own paper." And finally, imperative. In the English language, imperatives or commands often tend to be shorter sentences. So, for example, instead of saying, "You will take this worksheet and complete it," this is a future tense. Instead, in the imperative, "Finish the worksheet." Bam, 3 words. It's simple and it is a basic affirmative command. Second, I think that effective instructions should quickly set up the interaction patterns. What do I mean by interaction patterns? How will students interact with each other in the course of an activity? Will they be working individually, in pairs, in a group, or with the whole class? Whatever instructions you give, this should be very, very clear to students. Some interaction patterns require multiple movements or shifts. For example, in a lot of group presentations, individual or pair work often might combine into group work, which then spreads out into the whole class as you present. Or consider a jigsaw where you have multiple group movements where students are discussing and sharing information. When considering how to instruct an activity, thinking about the shifts and movements among interaction patterns can be very helpful. In general, it creates more interesting and dynamic activities when you can vary interaction patterns, which is why at JIEI we love Think, Pair, Share so gosh darn much. Number 3, effective instructions take minimal time. Of course, if the teacher is explaining too much, the students are not working on anything and less learning might be occurring. So I like to think about this in terms of teach, do, teach. That means when you consider how to instruct a given activity, think about the minimum length of instruction you need for the students to accomplish a task. Rather than conceiving of an activity or a project in its entirety, think about breaking it up into very small chunks. Because what this does, as my friend Brian will now explain,
you are doing things where you give the tiniest bit of instructions you can, and then students have to react or show understanding in some way, then they can get traction on what's going on, and you're building up a discourse with them.
Yeah.
And then, even if the expectations aren't totally clear, because sometimes you have, for example, you might have co-teachers who all behave differently, or the school overall might not be good at setting clear expectations. But if you can have a way of kind of creating the dialogue with students where you build up expectations together, then it will work better, I think.
Building together. I love that.
So basically, if you want to keep students as engaged as possible, it's a lot more effective to have a more rapid back and forth dynamic between a teacher's instruction and a student's action, which is why it can be so important to break up activities into very small instructionable and actionable chunks. Teach, do, teach, do.